What's up, guys? I'm doing something a little bit different today, and I'm doing my coaching video for you guys in the evening. Um, no particular reason why. I just decided I'm going to try it out, see if there's a different outcome in the number of people that see the video and respond to it. So, I have an interesting topic for you guys today, and the reason I say it's interesting is because the way I don't want to say the way I learned about this topic, but what sort of brought it to my mind and realized that it was something important to talk about was because of a book that I'm reading. So if you follow me on Facebook, you know that I'm reading a book right now called White Fragility. And it's all about why it's difficult for white people to discuss racial bias and racism, especially with people of color, because of the sense of guilt that we get when we start talking about racism and bias and prejudice. And so in this book, they talk about, first of all, that there's a huge issue with the fact that we confuse some definitions here. So racism, we usually define racism as being like individual, overt, intentional acts of like discrediting or hating on a different race other than your own. Actually, I guess it could even be on your own race, but it's like intentional acts of hatred or dislike or discontent with a particular race. And so we see these overt intentional acts as being that is what racism is. Um, and really, that's not racism. That's bias. Well, I'm sorry, no, I take that back. That's bias and prejudice coming out as discrimination. So these acts are discrimination. Racism is when this discrimination gets embedded into the very culture and system of either a country or a society to the point where it actually gets backed with a lot more power, a lot more money. Like when laws start getting passed that actually support the ability for people to be able to discriminate and act on their biases and whatnot. So when we talk about racism in the US, we're not talking about individual acts. We're talking about the system in place that allows for people's bias and discrimination to kind of get unnoticed, get swept under the rug, and to actually be supported by systems in the US. So, here's the topic that I want to talk about today that she brought up in the book. And I don't normally call it this, but I thought the way that she presented it, the author presented it, was really quite genius. She calls it the good bad binary. And you guys know I've talked to you all before about the importance of not thinking in terms of black and white. Like there are more than two options. It's not always that there is a right or a wrong option. There's all of this gray area that we're so unwilling to explore. And so people tend to like binary thinking because it gives us like a sense of security, like we have a little bit more control. There are only two options, one's right, one's wrong. Just choose the right one and you're good, right? Okay, that's binary thinking. So when she talks about the good bad binary, here's what she's talking about. She's talking about the fact that when people think of racism, they think of it being these intentional acts of discrimination. Well, if that's how you define racism, and you say, okay, well, I don't do those things, therefore I'm not racist, topic over, no need for discussion. This leaves a whole lot of space open for areas in which discrimination can kind of occur subtly and subconsciously in ways that we're not aware of, but because of the fact that we've already discredited ourselves as possibly being racist, we don't examine our own behavior and our own thinking and the ways that we could possibly be inadvertently racist or could be contributing to the system of racism inadvertently because of the fact that we grew up in a society and a culture that is racist. And so it's impossible to not be impacted by growing up in that system. And so what we also end up doing is by saying that these things over here are what's racist and I'm not that. What we do is in our minds, we basically like get this image of what a racist looks like. This ignorant, overtly loud, discriminatory, angry, vicious, violent person towards other races. And so we think, I'm not that. Because if I'm that, I'm bad. So I'm good, which means I can't be that, so therefore I'm not racist. Well, here's the thing. You can have racial tendencies. You can have racial bias. You can even be, oh, actually, I don't even want to say be racist. You can have racist beliefs and racist behaviors, and that doesn't make you a bad person. It means that it could mean so many other things. It could mean that you are just a product of growing up in a racist system. And that therefore, because you grew up in a racist system, you were impacted by the system, you were influenced by this system to therefore develop racist beliefs and thoughts without even realizing it. Because in a system like this, it wouldn't be labeled as racist. So it's just, that's the way we think, right? That's just how it is. Like, for instance, think about this. When we talk about another person as white people, we don't label, we usually, unless we're talking to a person of color or another race, we don't specify that a person is white. Unless it's also because there was a person who was black or Middle Eastern or some other race involved in the story, and therefore you need to identify the fact that one person was white and then the other people were another race. But it's almost kind of like we think like the default race is white, and the only time you need to distinguish race is if it's something different than white. Well, that's racist. But we don't even realize the fact that we do it because it's so normal for us to just think, oh yeah, well, white's just the default race. That's the normal race. So the only time we have to distinguish race is if it's something different than white. Why is that though? Why is it that we only have to distinguish races when it's something different than black? Why don't we do that? Well, it's because we grew up in a society that promotes white supremacy. And when I say white supremacy, I'm not talking about like the Ku Klux Klan. I'm talking about the fact that white tends to be the default and the preferred race in very subtle ways, and that therefore all the other races are kind of like, I don't want to say subcategories, but like not the default main race of humans. And that's racist. But that doesn't mean that if you think this way and you say these things, that you're a bad person. It means that you grew up in a racist culture and racist system, and therefore you need to be more aware of the things that you say, think, and do, because even though you're not a bad person, you can still be promoting racism. And this is why the good-bad binary thinking doesn't serve us in the battle against racism. So why am I talking to you guys about this? Because I'm not a diversity coach, but I am studying about racism right now, and I'm having my mind blown because I'm learning so many different ways in which I myself carry racial bias that I never even thought about before. Because I grew up in such a system that influenced me, and I was unable to see how it was influencing me. I couldn't even see the ways in which I had become racially biased because I didn't know anything different. So it's not even until now that I'm having information presented to me in a different way that I'm able to see the way that I think about this isn't the only way to think about this. So the reason I'm wanting to talk to you guys about this is because this applies in so many other areas in our lives. So many times I have clients coming to me that are suffering with issues with their self-image or things going on in their life that they feel like they're out of control with, and they just want to get back to feeling like they're in the driver's seat of their life. And a lot of times I will bring up to someone something that I see that they're struggling with, like in their thinking. Like I might talk to them about like their negative self-talk or their self-hate. And they will automatically be like, oh no, I don't hate myself. I don't hate myself. Like they have to justify to me like I'm not a bad person. Like I'm not a hateful person. Like somehow if I admit that I hate myself, that this makes me like this kind of person over here, and I'm not that kind of person. And it goes back to this binary thinking that we have to see things as like being good or bad, versus seeing you grew up with a culture, a system, a society that taught you to think this way. And therefore, you have to be especially careful and cautious and not just like sweep it under the rug and push it off to the side. Like, that's not possible for me to be this way because I'm a good person. And so therefore you never even pay attention to the things going on inside of your own head because you don't even think that it's possible that you could even be thinking these things. And so we become so unaware of our own biases. We become so unaware of our own thinking. We become so unaware of the destructiveness and the negativeness of our thinking because we think if we see that and we admit to it, that somehow we're a bad person. And what I want to offer is, first of all, there's no good or bad. There are behaviors. There are behaviors that we, as a society, agree on as being not desirable behaviors so that we can create a system of organization, so that we can live in a peaceful manner that most people would see as being peaceful. And so we create these rules, these laws, these ways of behaving that we tend to agree in majority as being the most beneficial for keeping society smoothly running and non-chaotic. But guys, what I want to offer is that these are made up systems. They're made up rules. Am I saying we need to change them all? No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is when we get stuck into the trap of thinking good, bad, we put ourselves in a position of not being willing to become aware of our own thinking, because we won't allow ourselves to see the areas of our thinking that we're struggling with because we don't want to be labeled as a bad person. We don't want to look at the areas of our behaviors that may be not so beneficial for the kind of outcome that we want to create in our life. Because if we see that we have behaviors that are labeled as one way or another, we would have to maybe see ourselves as being bad, and then we judge ourselves. So guys, this good bad binary thinking, not only is it causing such a huge issue with racism getting swept under the rug, it's also causing such a huge issue with us just in general being able to understand our own thinking, our own behaviors, and to become open and honest and vulnerable with being able to see our behaviors and talk about them comfortably. Talk about the areas of our behaviors that we're like, yeah, this is an area of behavior that I noticed in myself. It's not getting me the results that I want. So I would like to really focus on where this came from, the thinking that it's coming from, and why it is that I developed it, and does it serve me? Do I want to keep it around? But if we're so afraid to see our behaviors in a truthful, unfiltered lens, because we're afraid of being labeled as bad, we'll never take that step. We'll never truly, objectively, as much as possible, because it's impossible for us humans to be 100% objective. We always have a subjective lens. But if we truly want to become as objective as possible, we have to let go of that good, bad binary thinking. Racism will continue staying around, and even if we think we get rid of it, it will just remanifest itself in so many different ways if we keep around this binary thinking of good and bad. You don't have to be a bad person to have racial bias. You don't have to be a bad person to see your racial bias manifest itself in behaviors. That doesn't make you a bad person. But when you're unwilling to talk about it and look at it and examine where it came from and be like, okay, maybe this belief isn't serving, maybe this behavior isn't serving me, this isn't, now that I'm looking at it, okay, maybe I don't want to keep this behavior around. But just because you had it doesn't make you a bad person. So guys, good, bad, binary thinking. We have to try and break that cycle. We have to break the cycle if we want to end the battle with racism, if we want to end the battle with mental suffering, if we want to end the battle with being able to be present and be able to create the life that we want to create with intention. We have to let go of the good, bad, binary thinking. Because I'm not going to say this, the good, bad, binary thinking is not bad, but it won't serve you in that journey. The good, bad, binary thinking, if you do it, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's because that's what we've all been taught and sort of raised and societalized and socialized. I said societalized. Socialized to think. That's how we've been socialized to think, is like this. If you do this, you're good. If you do this, you're bad. But if you go back just in the last 20, 30 years, look at how the definition of good and bad has changed. So the definition of good and bad is very fluid. So really, is there a good or bad? Or are there just behaviors that we're unwilling to see because we don't want to admit that we're producing an outcome, because we want to, if we do, then we see ourselves as bad. So being willing to see these behaviors by letting go of the judgment that they are bad or that we are bad for exhibiting them allows us to become a lot more open, a lot more able to communicate, a lot more able to listen, a lot more able to learn, a lot more able to not be so defensive when someone points out, hey, what you did right there comes across as a little bit racist. And maybe it's actually the reason we get so defensive is because in our intention, we weren't intending to be racist. But in this person's perspective, it came across as racist. We don't have to intend to be racist for someone else to perceive it as being racist. And that doesn't mean you're right or wrong or they're right or wrong, but being able to openly communicate that without judgment of yourself or the other person, that's the key right there. And we're not able to do that if we're in this binary good bad thinking. We have to remain open to that gray area, that openness to, yeah, I can actually see now that I'm hearing your perspective how that behavior could be perceived as racist. I didn't intend for it to be racist, but maybe I should observe why it is that I exhibit this behavior so I can either change it or I can be a little bit more communicative about why it is that I'm behaving this way and be more clear about, like, I understand that this can be perceived this way, but that's not what I intend. This is what I intend for it to mean. So that way we can sort of bypass this whole defensiveness when someone brings up a behavior and says, hey, when you did that, that seemed very racist to me, or that seemed very offensive to me. Well, that doesn't mean that you were intending to be offensive, or that you're an offensive person, or that you're a racist person, or that you're a bad person. Just be open. Be open to seeing the other person's side, the other person's perspective. Because neither one of your perspectives are right or wrong. They're just your perspectives. That's the only way we perceive things, is through perspective. Through our experience in life, how we perceive it, those become our lenses for how we see everything from that point on. Here comes the kicker, though. We also get to decide how we make those lenses. But we can't decide how we make those lenses with intention until we're willing to let go of the good-bad binary thinking and examine with openness our behavior and our thinking. So I'm going to say it again. If we want to end the battle with racism, if we want to end the battle with human suffering, if we want to end the battle of this ego defensiveness in our behavior as humans, we have to let go of the good-bad binary thinking. This is a lot to discuss, guys. Maybe a little bit confusing. I even, in the process of talking about it, go down some rabbit holes because there's so much there, so much to think about and talk about. So if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Let's open up the conversation about this. No judgment. Let's talk about this. Let's get open. Let's let go of that good-bad binary thinking and be willing to discuss the things that we're struggling with, the things that, we want to think we're so sure about, but maybe we're not. Actually, not maybe we're not. We aren't. There's no way we can be, because we're just humans. Our perception is based on our experience, and that experience is so limited. So guys, if you have questions, don't be afraid to ask them. If you have comments, don't be afraid to leave them. Love or like this video, share it, get the message out there. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want more videos like this. And I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. I'll talk to you soon. Have a great Thursday afternoon, evening if you're in the US, nighttime if you're here in Switzerland with me. And I'll talk to you soon.